When I was 14, my parents looked me straight in the eye and said I was nothing but a burden. My mother's voice was cold when she told me, "We can't keep wasting our lives on you." My father didn't argue. He pulled a black trash bag from the closet, stuffed my clothes inside, and pushed it into my arms. The last words I heard before the door slammed were his, "You'll figure it out, or you won't. Either way, you're not our problem anymore." I stood on the sidewalk, with everything I owned sagging inside that bag. This wasn't just rejection, it was erasure. Neighbors peeked from behind their curtains, but no one stepped forward. I was 14, hungry, frightened, and completely alone. Years passed. I survived on scraps, worked odd jobs, and built a life they swore I'd never have. I thought the worst was behind me, but 12 years later, I walked into my grandfather's funeral, wearing a borrowed suit that barely fit, only to see the same parents who abandoned me arrive in shining luxury cars. They stepped out laughing, their jewelry catching the light, acting as though they owned the place. When whispers spread that my grandfather had left behind a $42 million estate, they raised their voices and demanded their share. Everyone turned to the front when the lawyer opened his folder. My heart pounded as he scanned the faces of my family before stopping on me. A small smile formed on his lips as he read aloud, "The heir to everything is the one who kept my secret safe," and then he pointed directly at me. After that night, my parents threw me out. Life stopped being about childhood and became about survival. At 14, while other kids worried about homework or weekend plans, I was standing on street corners trying to figure out where to sleep without getting robbed. The first week was the hardest. I carried that bag of clothes from block to block, too proud to beg, too scared to ask for help. Hunger gnawed at me so sharply that one night I crouched behind a diner, waiting for the cook to throw out garbage bags. I dug through them and found half a sandwich. That was my dinner. The worst part wasn't the hunger or the cold. It was the silence from the people who should have cared. My mother Clarice always cared more about appearances than affection. She loved spotless houses, expensive perfumes, and friends who admired her style. To her, children were accessories, and I was a defective one. My father, Damon, was harder to read but sharper in his cruelty. Every word from him felt like judgment. When I brought home grades that weren't perfect, he'd say, "A cutaway should never be average." I never once heard him say he was proud of me. When they cast me out, they didn't just close the door, they shut down any idea that family meant unconditional love. I had a younger sister, Mira, who was 12 when they made me leave. I still see her face pressed against the upstairs window as I walked down the driveway, her small hand tapping against the glass while she cried. But my parents pulled her away. That image stayed with me through the darkest nights. Mira was the only one who looked at me like I mattered. But she was trapped in their world, forced into silence. Only one person tried to keep a connection alive. My grandfather, Silas Calloway. He was Damon's father, a man with a weathered face and a voice that carried both authority and kindness. He wasn't one for gentle words, but his actions spoke louder. He ran a small chain of businesses and carried himself like a man who built his empire with his own hands. Most people feared him, but I knew better. He didn't pity me. He respected the fight in me. Every few months, when I was struggling the most, I would catch him watching me from a distance. Once he slipped me a folded $20 with a quick grunt, as if embarrassed to show affection, and said, "Don't waste it." That was his way of caring. Despite the struggles, I found ways to survive. Working at gas stations, washing dishes, shoveling snow in winter, mowing lawns in summer. Each dollar was proof that I didn't need Clarice or Damon to exist. School was harder. Some nights I slept on park benches, other nights in shelters, but I still showed up to class. Teachers noticed, but I lied and said everything was fine. Pride kept me from telling anyone the truth. By 16, I had learned how to blend in. I didn't complain, didn't ask for more than I earned, and I kept moving forward. The sting of rejection hardened into determination. When people told me I looked tired, I just smiled. When they asked about my parents, I said they were busy. In reality, they were too busy pretending I didn't exist. Through all of it, one memory kept me going. Before he passed, Grandpa Silas once told me, "The measure of a man isn't who stands with him when it's easy. It's who he becomes when no one stands at all." I didn't fully understand it then, but those words became a compass. They reminded me that even though my parents had abandoned me, I could still become something stronger. The years rolled by, and slowly I built a life out of nothing. At 18, I saved enough to rent a tiny room above a hardware store. At 20, I balanced two jobs while taking community college classes at night. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I wasn't anyone's burden or mistake. I was surviving, and survival felt like victory. Still, I wondered if Mira remembered me, if she asked about me, if Clarice and Damon had erased my name from the family, if Grandpa Silas had ever defended me. Those questions stayed with me, but I buried them under work and focus. That's how life was until the phone call came. A cousin I barely remembered told me Grandpa Silas had passed away. The funeral would be held at the family estate, the same place I hadn't stepped into since the night I was cast out. I didn't have much: a borrowed suit, shoes too tight, and a car that coughed more than it ran. But I knew I had to be there. For the first time in years, I would face the people who abandoned me. I wasn't sure if I was ready, but I knew one thing: I would no longer walk into their world as the boy they threw away. I was coming as the man I had fought to become. The morning of the funeral felt heavy. My chest tightened as I buttoned the collar of a borrowed shirt. I studied myself in the cracked mirror of my room above the hardware store. The man staring back looked tired, older than his years, but his eyes carried something my parents had never recognized: resolve. This wasn't just about saying goodbye to my grandfather. This was about walking back into a world that once threw me out and showing them that I had survived. When I pulled up to the Callaway estate, the driveway was lined with polished black cars: Mercedes, Bentleys, even a Rolls-Royce. I parked my sputtering sedan at the far end, out of sight, and walked up the gravel path. Guests in expensive suits and glittering jewelry swept past me without recognition. Inside the house I hadn't seen since childhood, the smell of polished wood and cologne hit me. Memories flooded back. I saw myself as a boy running through those same halls, Mira laughing behind me. Now the laughter was gone, replaced by whispers and the faint sound of a string quartet. At the center of it all was my grandfather's casket, draped in dark velvet with a simple photo above it. He looked stern even in the picture, but to me he looked like the only one who believed I was worth something. Then I saw them. My mother and father entered from the far side of the room, their presence demanding attention. Clarice wore a black dress with pearls, her expression carefully arranged. Damon followed, posture straight, suit tailored, eyes scanning the room like a man measuring his worth by who he could control. Behind them was my Uncle Rhett, broad-shouldered, loud even in silence, his smirk betraying greed. They saw me instantly. Clarice's lips tightened. She leaned toward Damon and muttered something I couldn't hear. His response came sharp and clear: "He shouldn't even be here." I walked toward the casket, ignoring the stares. I placed my hand on the polished wood. For a moment it was just me and him. "Thank you for never forgetting me," I whispered. As I turned, Mira appeared at the edge of the room. She was 24 now, grown into the young woman I had only imagined. Her eyes widened when she saw me, and for a second I saw the same little sister who had pressed her hand against the glass the night I left. She didn't come closer though. My parents' presence kept her still. Her silence was loud, but her eyes told me everything. I had been missed. The ceremony began. The pastor spoke about Silas's hard work, accomplishments, and legacy. I listened, but my focus drifted to the rows of faces, each one waiting for what would come next. Not the prayers or eulogies, but the will. When the service ended, the lawyer, Mr. Hayes, stepped forward. A tall man with graying hair, his black suit crisp, his movements precise. He carried a thick folder. The room shifted instantly. Conversations quieted. Even the air seemed to hold still. Mr. Hayes cleared his throat. "As executor of Silas Calloway's estate, I will now read the provisions of his will. His voice carried authority. Every head turned toward him. My uncle Rhett leaned back in his chair with a grin. Finally, he muttered. Damon straightened his tie. Clarice dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief she didn't need. Mira sat frozen. I stayed near the back, my hands in my lap, pretending I wasn't shaking. The lawyer began listing small bequests, donations to charities, gifts to longtime employees, minor properties to distant relatives. The tension grew thicker with each line. Everyone was waiting for the final announcement, the fortune that would define the Culloway name for decades. Finally, Mr. Hayes paused. He shuffled the papers deliberately, his eyes sweeping the room. As for the majority of my estate, he read, $42 million in assets, businesses and properties. I leave it all to one person, but only one. Clarice leaned forward. Damon's jaw tightened. Rhett's smirk widened. Mira's eyes darted nervously. Mr. Hayes continued. The heir to everything will not be the one who demanded the most, nor the one who carries my name the loudest. The heir will be the one who kept my secret safe. Confusion rippled through the crowd. Rhett frowned. Damon snapped his head toward the lawyer. Clarice whispered sharply, "What does that mean?" Mr. Hayes closed the folder carefully and looked up. His gaze swept over the room until it landed on me. He smiled, subtle, but undeniable, and then raised his hand and pointed directly at my chest. Gasps erupted. Damon shot to his feet. "This is a mistake," he barked. Clarice clutched her pearls, shaking her head. Rhett slammed his fist against his chair. Every eye turned toward me. My chest tightened. My pulse roared in my ears, but I didn't flinch. For the first time in years, I wasn't the boy they had thrown away. I was the one holding the key to a secret none of them understood. The room erupted. My father's voice cut through first, sharp and furious. "This is absurd. That boy hasn't been part of this family for over a decade. How could he possibly be the heir?" My uncle Rhett joined in, mocking, "Come on, Hayes. Don't play games. Everyone knows Silas would never hand over $42 million to a castaway." My mother's face twisted with anger. She clutched Damon's arm and hissed, "Stop this nonsense right now." Her voice trembled, not with grief but with fear of losing what she believed was hers. The lawyer stayed calm, adjusting his glasses before answering. "Mr. Culloway, this was your father's wish. The will is clear. The one who inherits is the one who kept his secret safe." Then looking directly at me again, he asked, "Aaron, do you still have the box your grandfather gave you?" Then looking directly at me again, he asked, "Aaron, do you still have the box your grandfather gave you?" Gasps circled the room. My father's face reddened with rage, but the words froze me in place. For a second, the funeral hall disappeared, and I was back in a freezing alley 12 years earlier. I was 15, huddled beneath a broken fire escape, my breath visible in the winter air. My stomach ached from hunger, my hands raw from the cold. That night, I had nearly given up. Then I heard footsteps echoing against the brick walls. "Boy," a familiar voice called. I looked up and saw him, Grandpa Silas, wrapped in his heavy coat, standing taller than I had ever seen him. His eyes studied me with disappointment and something deeper, something like pride. "You're tougher than they'll ever admit," he said. He knelt in front of me, his hands rough but steady as he placed a wooden box in my lap. The box was about the size of a shoebox, its brass lock gleaming faintly under the streetlight. "Inside this box is something worth more than money," he told me. "You must not open it until the time is right. Promise me, Aaron. Guard this with your life. If you keep this safe, then one day you'll understand why I chose you." I stared at him, shivering, too weak to argue. "Why me?" I asked. His answer was simple. "Because you're the only one I trust. They want what I have. But you've never wanted anything from me, except love. That makes you stronger than all of them." I nodded, clutching the box with both hands. "I promise." For years I carried that box everywhere. It went with me from shelter to shelter, from cramped rooms to cheap apartments, There were nights I considered pawning it just to buy food. But I remembered Grandpa Silas's promise. The box kept me anchored, proof that even when the world turned away, someone trusted me. The memory faded, and I was back in the funeral hall, all eyes fixed on me. Slowly I reached under the chair, where my satchel sat, and pulled out the wooden box. The same one, still intact after all those years. The brass lock caught the chandelier's light. Gasps swelled through the room. My father lunged forward. "That doesn't prove anything," he spat. "He could have stolen it." Mr. Hayes lifted a hand. "No, Damon. Your father documented everything. He entrusted this box to Aaron. He told me the contents would show who honored his last wish." Clarice's voice broke. "This is madness. We raised him. We sacrificed for him, and he abandoned us. How dare you reward betrayal?" I met her gaze, and, for the first time, I didn't shrink. My voice was steady. "You didn't sacrifice for me. You threw me away because I wasn't convenient. Grandpa was the only one who treated me like I mattered. I made him a promise and I kept it." Silence fell. My Uncle Rhett folded his arms, bitter. Mira shifted, eyes moving between us, lips pressed as if holding back words. Mr. Hayes stepped closer. "Aaron, do you wish to open it now?" I hesitated. The box felt heavier than ever. My burden and my shield. Part of me feared disappointment. What if it was empty? What if his words were only a test? Then I felt Grandpa's presence and understood why I had guarded it for so long. "Yes," I said. "It's time." My father scoffed and turned away, fists clenched. My mother whispered, "This can't be happening." I set the box on the lawyer's table and the room tightened. Relatives leaned in. The polished wood reflected dim light, as if the family's future hung on a small brass key. Mr. Hayes reached into his pocket and produced that key. "Your grandfather gave this to me," he said. "It was to open only in your hands. Are you ready?" I nodded. My pulse hammered. The moment of truth had arrived. He set the key in the lock. My hands trembled as I steadied the box. For 12 years it had followed me through cold nights and hunger. Now, in the center of my family's gaze, it opened. The lock clicked. The lid creaked. Inside lay a worn leather-bound journal and a folded envelope sealed in red wax. Another round of gasps filled the room. My father stepped forward in disbelief. "That's it? A box of papers." Mr. Hayes lifted the journal carefully. "These are the writings of Silas Calloway," he said. "Reflections, accounts, and truths." He instructed they be read if Aaron presented the box intact. Claire's hissed. "This is theater. Silas would never give power to that boy." Hayes ignored her and began to read. The words were unmistakable, direct from Silas. "To my family I leave these words. Over the years I built a fortune from nothing. Money is not the true measure of worth. Character is. Character is revealed not by greed, but by loyalty and sacrifice." The room shifted. Damon sneered. Rhett crossed his arms. Mira leaned forward. Hayes read on. "To my eldest son, Damon, I leave nothing. You betrayed my trust when you stole from the company to cover your debts. To my brother Rhett, I leave nothing. You sought only to outshine me, and never honored the Calloway name. To Clarice, who married into this family, I leave nothing. Your heart has been ruled by vanity, not love." Clarice gasped, and turned to Damon. "Tell me he is lying." Damon said nothing. Mr. Hayes continued. "To my granddaughter Mira, I leave the hope she may one day free herself from the chains of her parents' cruelty. But to my grandson, Aaron, I leave everything. Because when the world abandoned him, he did not abandon me. He kept my secret safe." Hayes unfolded the sealed envelope and held it up, then opened it. Inside were documents, titles and account details, the sum of the Calloway fortune. He laid them on the table. Chaos erupted. My father stormed the table, booming. "This is a farce. You expect me to believe he cut me out and handed everything to him? He was senile. He was manipulated." Hayes stayed calm. "Your father notarized this 3 years ago. Every document is valid. There is no contest." Rhett slammed a hand on a chair. I'll take this to court, he declared. No way I walk away empty-handed while the boy thrown out walks away with millions. Hayes looked at him sharply. You can try, but the journal records your misdeeds, fraud, theft, betrayal. The court will see who your father trusted. Clarice turned to me. You ruined this family. Do you hear me, Aaron? You ruined us. My voice rose, firmer than I expected. No, you ruined this family the night you decided I was nothing. Grandpa didn't choose me for money. He chose me because I never betrayed him. For the first time, Mira spoke. Her voice trembled. He's right. She stood, hands shaking. All these years you told me Aaron was gone. That he was weak. He was stronger than all of us. Grandpa saw it. Now I see it too. Claire snapped at her. Sit down, Mira. You don't know what you're saying. Mira did not sit. She walked to my side, tears in her eyes. I'm sorry I didn't reach out sooner. I tried, but Mom and Dad told me it would hurt you. I swallowed. You were a child. None of this was your fault. The lawyer cleared his throat. It is final. The estate, the businesses, the accounts, all belong to Aaron Calloway. That is Silas Calloway's will, and it will be honored. The silence that followed felt heavier than any shouting. My parents stood frozen as their world unraveled. My uncle's face flushed with impotent rage. For the first time, I felt the weight of the family's power land on my shoulders. Clarice clutched Damon's arm. We'll find a way to undo this, she hissed. Damon said nothing, but his look promised a fight. They turned and left, their designer shoes clicking like a retreat. Rhett lingered long enough to point at me. You think this makes you one of us? You'll regret this. You'll regret ever opening that box. He spat, then stormed off. I stood with the journal open in Hayes's hands, the weight of my grandfather's words pressing on me like an unexpected crown. Mira stayed by my side, and for the first time in years I felt not alone. The boy they'd thrown away had become the man who now held what they wanted. And the truth, when the last of them left, the string quartet had stopped. The only sound was Mr. Hayes packing the documents that now bore my name. My hands rested on the box I had carried for 12 years, and for the first time it felt light. Mira's voice was soft. I always wanted to write you, Aaron. I wanted to find you. But every time I tried, Mom and Dad said it would only hurt you. They told me you didn't care. I looked at her, seeing the woman she had become. I never stopped caring, Mira. Not for a single day. You were the reason I kept going. Her eyes filled with tears. Then maybe we can start again. I nodded. Yes, we can start again. Mr. Hayes placed the journal in my hands. Your grandfather was a hard man, but he was not blind. He saw through greed. He saw who truly had honor. He wanted you to know you were never forgotten. I read the final line aloud. My heir is the one who understood that trust is worth more than gold. The words sank in. They were not just an inheritance. They were absolution. I walked out of the estate with Mira at my side. The winter sun broke through the clouds and lit the driveway, where hours earlier my parents had arrived in their luxury cars. Now those cars were gone, leaving only quiet. For the first time in years, I felt no anger. They had tried to bury me, and in doing so they proved what I had always known. Family is not defined by blood alone, but by love, loyalty, and truth. In the weeks that followed, lawyers transferred accounts, papers were signed, properties changed hands, headlines whispered that the Calloway fortune had moved to the grandson nobody spoke of. My parents tried to contest the will, but the journal closed every door. My uncle's threats faded as his own wrongdoing came to light. The biggest change wasn't money, it was me. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I had a purpose. I remembered the boy who once ate from trash bags and shivered in alleys. That boy had kept his promise, and that promise became the foundation of everything I now held. Mira visited often. We read the journal together, laughing and crying over stories about Silas. She confessed her regrets. I told her none of it was her fault. We began rebuilding something broken but not lost. In quiet moments, I traced my grandfather's handwriting and thought about what he gave me. Not just money or property, but a reminder that my worth never depended on the approval of those who abandoned me. My worth came from promises I kept, the integrity I showed when no one was watching. Looking back, I understand the inheritance was never about fortune. It was vindication. It proved that resilience and loyalty outlast betrayal, that a boy cast aside could stand taller than those who tried to erase him. Here's the lesson I carry and want you to remember. You may feel abandoned, betrayed, or forgotten, but your value is not defined by those who fail to see it. Your value is defined by the promises you keep, the fight you refuse to give up, and the love you choose to protect when the world turns away. When I signed the final papers and placed my name on the inheritance, I didn't feel revenge. I felt peace. I gained back my voice, my dignity, and the knowledge that I had never been the burden they claimed. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear they're not alone. Leave a comment and tell me your thoughts. I want to hear your stories too. If you'd like more like this, subscribe to the channel. Your support helps me keep sharing truths about survival, resilience, and the lessons life teaches in the hardest ways.